How's it going everyone, Roslyn here. So Atlas's new title, Metaphor ReFantazio, is right around the corner and I recently had the opportunity to play through an extended portion of it. Now those of you who have been around on the channel for a while, especially those of you who hang out over on the stream at twitch.tv/RoslynGaming, know that I tend to temper my expectations for new games. I make an effort not to let myself get too hyped for new games, often taking a more critical and analytical approach to my evaluation of them, even for my favorite games, and Metaphor is no different. And after my time with Metaphor, I'd like to say that I'm currently cautiously optimistic about the title. I did enjoy what I played, and will of course play the full release later this year, but I would be lying if I said I still don't have some reservations. Just a quick disclaimer with regards to the footage being used in this video. During my time with the game, I was able to capture footage, however due to a mistake I made with my capture settings on my laptop, my footage turned out, well, take a look for yourself. Yeah, this is not what the game looked like at all. There were a few minor hiccups, but overall it ran very smoothly. However, because my footage turned out this way, much of what will be shown in this video will be footage that was provided to me instead, so apologies in advance. Metaphor ReFantazio, formerly known as Project Re-Fantasy, is Atlas's new title, which has been in development since 2016 by Studio Zero. Studio Zero being one of Atlas's 3 internal development teams. It was formed by director and producer Hashino Katsura, who also directed SMT3 Nocturne, Digital Devil Saga, Persona 3, Persona 4, and Persona 5 among others. And this background in Persona titles definitely shows as Metaphor is, for all intents and purposes, a Persona game. Many familiar elements of modern Persona titles have made its way into Metaphor. For example, the game operates on a time schedule just like Persona. You are given an objective in order to progress the main story, and a deadline by which that needs to be completed. Every day is broken up into time periods, and after performing certain actions during a given time period, the day advances to the next time period. You are even provided an in-game calendar with which to keep track of events, just like in Persona. Now, one of the events you can do during a time period is to hang out with one of your bonds, which are essentially social links. As you progress through the game, you'll meet different characters who you'll be able to form a bond with, and by deepening your bonds with these characters, you'll be able to rank them up. But as similar as bonds are to social links, they do connect to one aspect of Metaphor that starts to differ from Persona, and that is with archetypes. You see, each bond represents an archetype, similar to how each social link in Persona represents an arcana. Forming a bond with a character will unlock that character's corresponding archetype, and ranking up their bond will provide further benefits to said archetype. Archetypes take the form of jobs and classes you may see in traditional high fantasy settings, such as Seeker, Mage, and Warrior. And they also define how your characters operate in battle. Think of them like a character's persona. Each archetype has different skills they learn as they level up, and by equipping an archetype to a character, that character gains access to said skills. Archetypes also dictate the equipping character's weaknesses and resistances, just like with Persona. But there are some differences between archetypes and Persona. For starters, there is no fusion. The way you gain new archetypes is by forming new bonds, leveling up bonds, and leveling up existing archetypes in order to unlock higher versions of them. Another difference is that archetypes don't dictate a character's stats. Instead, they augment them. Whenever you level up in Metaphor, you allocate stat points similar to Shin Megami Tensei, and then those stats are augmented based on whatever archetype a character has equipped. Additionally, archetypes also dictate what weapons and equipment a character can use. One more key difference between Persona and archetypes is that archetypes can be equipped to any character, so if you want to have a party of all mages, you can. Should you want to change a character's archetype or unlock new ones, all you need to do is visit the Definitely Not the Velvet Room Academia and talk to Definitely Not Young Igor more. The Academia becomes available fairly quickly as you progress the main story, and from then on, you can access it by talking to more near a save point. One thing though that I'm a little worried about with regards to archetypes is the apparent lack of being able to transfer skills. In both Persona and SMT titles, one of my favorite things to do is to fuse new Persona and demons, transferring skills around in order to make highly optimized, strong Persona and demons. But at least from what I played, the skills available to a character were whatever that character's equipped archetype could learn. Hopefully something unlocks later in the game that allows you to pass skills around, or maybe retain skills from archetypes you fully leveled, really anything that allows for more customization, as it would be kind of a bummer if there wasn't anything like that. Anyways, since we've been talking about archetypes, let's talk about the battle system. So the battle system was perhaps one aspect of the game I was the most concerned about when it came to Metaphor. The main reason for this is the addition of an action portion of the combat system, and its very striking similarities to another game's implementation of this, namely The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak. Falcom also introduced an action element to their battle system, starting with Trails Through Daybreak. The idea was that for weaker enemies, you could simply defeat them in action combat, and then for tougher enemies and bosses, you would initiate turn-based combat. In practice though, things were a bit different. You see, if you attacked an enemy through action combat, you could put them into a broken state, after which if you then initiated turn-based combat, you'd get a preemptive attack and a whole slew of bonuses. This incentivized spending time in action combat, followed by entering turn-based combat no matter what enemy you were facing. And then to further emphasize this playstyle, the rewards for completing combat in turn-based mode were better than action mode. The issue with this was twofold. First was that action combat extended the overall duration of combat by turning the act of attacking an enemy once from behind for a preemptive attack and the subsequent bonuses from one attack to a bunch of attacks. For any one given combat, this didn't amount to much, but over the course of a long JRPG, it really added up, causing the act of entering combat to become quite a chore. The second issue was that action combat itself was just very bland. The only options available were to attack, heavy attack, and dodge. Daybreak 2 did add the ability to cast one magic attack on a cooldown, but other than that, nothing changed. Falcom is known for having a great turn-based battle system used in the Trail series, but they're also known for having good action combat systems in both Tokyo Xanadu and the East series. So seeing them fumble with combining the two systems into one game led me to have concerns about Metaphor when I heard Atlus was going to be doing the same thing. Now I know someone is going to say, but what about Persona 5 Strikers? That game's combat was an action combat system. And yes, it was, but crucially, Strikers combat wasn't developed by Atlus. It was developed by Omega Force, a development division of Koei Tecmo. Luckily though, Atlus made two big changes that, for the most part, alleviated my concerns. Just like with Falcom's system in Daybreak, in Metaphor you attack enemies and dodge their attacks until you break them, at which point you can initiate turn-based combat in order to get a preemptive attack. When directly comparing the two from this point of view, Falcom actually does it better. Their implementation of action combat is smoother, and despite its simplicity, it actually ends up somehow being more complex than Metaphor's. But we have those two big changes. The first is that I saw no discernible difference in rewards obtained from battle between using action combat only versus using turn-based combat. Now the caveat here is that I wasn't able to adequately test this with the time I had with the game, but assuming I'm correct and there is no reward difference, this means that you can safely take out weaker enemies with just action combat. The second big change, and really the more important of the two, is that if you attack an enemy from behind when they are unaware of your presence, you immediately break the enemy, allowing you to initiate turn-based combat with a preemptive attack. This is huge as it effectively allows you to completely bypass the action combat system and still reap all the benefits of a preemptive strike. So after all that talk about the action portion of combat, what about turn-based combat? Well, as with most turn-based combat systems from Atlus, you will of course notice a few familiar elements. For starters, it features a press turn system that incentivizes hitting enemy weaknesses in order to get extra actions. And of course, if your weaknesses are hit, then the enemy will get extra actions as well. Along the same lines, dodging attacks or nullifying damage will also use up multiple press turns. When it comes to boss encounters, they very much resemble Persona 5. There are multiple targets to attack besides a boss's main body, and the bonus actions that let you command one of your companions to perform a special action in order to gain an advantage are also present. However, one new aspect of Metaphor's combat that I'm looking forward to playing around with more and optimizing is the addition of rows in battle. During turn-based combat, you can move your characters back and forth between a front and back row. Characters in the front row take more damage, but in return deal more melee damage, whereas characters positioned in the back row will take less damage, but also deal less damage with melee attacks. The obvious implementation of this is to put casters and healers in the back row with your more tanky characters up front. But given how easily you can swap a character's position on their turn in battle, I foresee using this as a way to help mitigate damage in difficult encounters. Honestly, I'm just looking forward to getting more time with this system inside the already tried and true press turn combat system. To wrap this video up, I want to briefly go over what I liked and what I didn't like, and what I'm still on the fence about with regards to Metaphor after having played an extended portion of it. Some of this I've already touched upon, but some of it I haven't. For starters, one thing I was actually really impressed with were the animated cutscenes. To be specific, the transition from in-game cutscene to anime cutscenes. Not only were there just a bunch of these anime cutscenes, the transition into and out of them felt natural. Part of this is because of how close the in-game graphics are to actual anime, but also just the transitions themselves played a huge role. Anime cutscenes aren't new in JRPGs, and even Persona has had them in the past. But every time they come up, there is a sense of, oh nice, an anime cutscene. Whereas in Metaphor, it was more of a, oh, a cutscene just started. That distinction between cutscene and anime cutscene has been minimized, and it was honestly really impressive. I'm also really interested in diving more into the role mechanics and combat, as well as the archetype system. I do still hope that there will be a way to transfer skills or retain learned skills, but even if there isn't, the fact that there are as many archetypes as there are bonds is promising. Also, while it may be somewhat controversial for some, I actually like that archetypes and their strength are tied to bonds. It gives even more of an incentive to seek out and max all bonds than Persona's S-links normally do. And I also like the time management system, as planning out how I will use my time in Persona titles is always one of the things I enjoy the most, even if I know there are people who want that system removed. One thing I didn't like though is that a lot of the data is still obfuscated from the player. Skill potencies, buff and debuff potencies, whether or not weapons affect skill damage or just normal attack damage, things like that. I know I can just data mine the game to get all that information, but honestly I shouldn't need to, and wish they would just provide us that information in the in-game descriptions. Finally, I am a little worried about the game's difficulty, as it really felt too easy. Outside of select bosses and super bosses, Atlas titles tend to be at their most difficult during the early stages of the game, so the fact that Metaphor felt so easy throughout the early stages is somewhat concerning. That being said, I was informed that adjustments were still being made, and I did provide my feedback, so we'll see come full release. Anyways, I think I'll go ahead and wrap things up here. I know earlier in the video I said that Metaphor was basically a Persona title, and it really makes sense given that the concept for Metaphor is basically, what if we made Persona only as a high fantasy title? There are definitely more similarities than what I mentioned in this video, but I want to leave some of them for you guys to see for yourselves. That and others would veer into spoiler territory, so I obviously didn't mention those. And of course there are some things that I saw and discussed with the devs directly that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. But I'll stop rambling and leave things at that. If you liked the video, please be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you have any questions about Metaphor, or any other game that I cover, feel free to hit me up over on Twitch at twitch.tv/RoslinGaming, or my Discord server, both of which are linked in the video description below. Until next time, take care.